I'm here at the RSA with Tom Ptacek, principal at Matasano Security. What are you doing at RSA? I don't think I've ever seen you here.
I've been to RSA in the past. This year, Matasano has a booth at RSA. So we're here. We launched our second product. So we're doing firewall security scanning. And the cool thing about that is we're doing open source.
Okay.
So we've launched an open source GPL firewall rule scanner. Really, really psyched about actually getting out there, contributing to the community, working with the community, talking to people about what we're doing instead of trying to sell them stuff. So that's why we are at RSA this year.
A big part of your business beyond the product side is consulting. Going in, doing these pen tests, doing audits, doing maybe forensics, post-infection forensics. As you go about the country dealing with clients, what is, some of the biggest real-world issues that you find even startling now? How companies are, security posturing companies, how, give me a sense of what you're seeing.
That's an interesting question. So the people at Matasano have been doing security research and vulnerability research since 1994. I think the most interesting thing that I see right now is there are people out there like the Charlie Millers of the world, the H.D. Moores of the world, the Dino Dizovis of the world, who are doing really cutting-edge vulnerability research, trying to evade runtime protections in browsers and get attack the most recent software and get around the protections that Microsoft are doing. That's excellent, excellent work, but I think it's slightly divorced from the reality of what real companies are dealing with, which is that they have mountains and mountains of source code that internal developers, that outsourced developers are building, and they're just trying to get a handle on what they should be doing to secure their internal code. They are miles and miles and miles away from what the Microsofts of the world are doing, and I don't see a lot of research being dedicated to the problems that enterprise security people are dealing with when they're trying to get code secured that they've built in-house.
Right, but that doesn't mean that their work isn't important, because a lot of what you see from Charlie and Dino and those guys today is what makes it into common malware.
It's
2 years from now.
What they're doing is computer science, and computer science is critically important.
Right.
I think what I'm seeing is that,
So what are these real-world issues? What are some of these, real vexing real-world things that companies are struggling to cope with? Beyond just determining, where your source code is coming from, is it secure, is it going to play nice with everything else?
I think a lot of it is that, so a great example of this is Microsoft. Over the last 10 years or so, Microsoft has done a momentous turnaround in fixing all these security problems. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars securing their code. I think other enterprises, some of which are very, very big companies with huge amounts of code, have not spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to secure that code because they can't.
They don't have the resources of a Microsoft.
Spend hundreds of millions of dollars. And the big question that we have in the industry right now is, if you don't have the expertise of a Microsoft, if you don't have the expertise that Adobe is building now, if you don't have the expertise that Google has built, how are you possibly going to deal with securing the systems that secure the financial systems, that secure the grid, that secure utilities and things like that? I think that's the question the industry really needs to deal with right now.
Right, and the issue of, let's go back to a couple of months ago. Google came out and said, we were hit by this advanced sophisticated threat. Turns out it was a IE6 vulnerability that only, exploited Windows XP systems. Was that surprising to you that, a company could get on from really, really old, almost obsolete software?
What surprises me is that...
Or are you seeing that a lot in consulting? You go into a place and really surprised by how,
I'm surprised
vulnerable a lot of businesses
I'm surprised it was so overt, right? I mean, I'm following with the research that ISEC Partners, one of our competitors and friends of ours, are doing with the Aurora stuff. I think they're doing really great work on trying to kind of represent to people what happened with the Aurora attacks. Nobody's surprised that somebody found the browser vulnerability that was exploitable in IE6 and broke into companies. I think we are surprised that it was so overt, that it was so, so weaponized, that it was so obviously that people were trying to get things out of companies, right? It's almost like 1991 style hacking when you're seeing these front page stories. It's almost like the New York Times got hacked kind of thing.
Right.
So you have to wonder whether we're kind of heading back in that direction, where it's less of an operational problem, it's less responding to the most recent vulnerabilities, and it's more like we're back to the era where we seriously have to wonder whether something's going to happen, we're going to lose the front page of the New York Times again or something like that.
But the fact that Google got hit doesn't mean that this is a new threat. I mean, targeted attacks using document format and browser vulnerabilities have been around. I wrote an A-Week cover piece, I think 2005, talking about these types of targeted attacks from really, smart attackers with resources and with motivation to go after specific targets. So none of this is entirely new. Beyond the fact that we know it's Google and maybe Intel. And
I think a lot of it has been kind of penny ante, kind of, you're making tons of money on it because you're kind of trying to get, bank accounts from, 0.005% of everybody you send mail to, but it's less literally trying to take down companies, get in there and get the most important assets out of those companies, right? This is more high risk, this is more overt, it's an escalation. Again, it's not necessarily what we at Matasano are thinking about day to day. We're thinking more about the 500,000 lines of code that no one in the world ever looked at before that happen to be critical to the security of financial markets.
Right.
That happen to be critical to the security of the power grid. And we're not talking about that, and we probably should be. So.
And no one is auditing those.
Sorry?
No one is auditing that code in a real systematic way.
Not at the level that we're talking about when we're talking about whether Microsoft can secure IE6 or whether Adobe's keeping up with Reader or whatever. So.
If you, because you're a big fan of cutting-edge vulnerability research, the things you talked about with Charlie and Dino and these things, have you seen anything really groundbreaking in the last year that stood out? I mean, I remember the last time Dow did his black hat thing, you were kind of overwhelmed by what he had done.
I wrote a blog post about Mark Dowd, who is still my personal hero, about an Adobe vulnerability he found. I think if I was writing blog posts about vulnerability researchers right now, I'd be writing a blog post about Hovav's paper about return-oriented programming. It's what everybody that I've seen at RSA is talking about right now. Is this really incredible paper about how you can take an existing program that's running on a machine, and instead of trying to inject your own code into the machine with your exploit, you harvest the code that's already there, and you turn it into a virtual machine that you can compile code for. It's like Voltron. There's all these tiny little bits of code that are in every program that's ever loaded on a normal operating system. And if you're really smart about the way you write exploits, you can write code that will reassemble those components, which are benevolent, helpful components that are needed to run the program. You can reassemble them malevolently and turn the program against itself. It's excellent, excellent research. So that's Hovav's return-oriented programming paper. I think everybody that's serious about exploit development is reading it right now or should be reading it.
One of the things, I just interviewed Charlie Miller here, and he talked about, he's giving his predictions for Pontoon at CanSec West. And we went through the browsers and the operating systems, and I said, what do you think about IE8 on Windows 7? And he said, 6 months ago I would say, no one's going to hit it. But over the last 6 months, this new JIT spraying thing out of Black Hat DC was really changed the game in terms of exploiting browsers on Windows 7. Just getting around, mitigations, getting around defenses. Have you been following that at all?
You know what I would tell you is I would take Charlie Miller's word for it. Okay. So the only answer you'll get from me is whatever Charlie Miller said, Charlie Miller's right about it. So.